Hello, welcome to this special presentation, kind of random, of the Buckle Bomb Show with me and Tony. Let's bring him in for the both of us here. Uh, I talked to him earlier today. Wasn't sure if we should do this or not. He was adamant that we should. And eventually, I came around with him that we'd do a little special show here in the middle of the week and talk about Scott Hall and what he means to us and to our wrestling fandom. Of course, we lost him yesterday as of this recording. It's going to be pretty late at night because we both had to work today. But it's going to be kind of not a lot of structure to this thing. We're just kind of quickly and throw our thoughts out there, maybe run through some pieces of his career, some that we knew about and some that we didn't, and see where we go with this thing, and talk about a guy that we're certainly going to miss in the wrestling business. Tony, how you doing, buddy?
Yeah, man, this was one of those things that the old saying is, wrestlers don't expect that longevity with age. Something about the business, the road, it takes that toll on you after a while. But for whatever reason, this one right here, this one kind of hit a little different. I maybe because he was one of the first wrestlers that I really actually recall seeing as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
But this was not the way anybody expected him to go, nor was this the way he deserved. So just prayers to him and his family.
Yeah, 100%. Obviously, his out of the ring issues are well documented. There's no reason for us to get into that. We kind of touched on it a little bit on Sunday. He's been through some shit, and in a Facebook post that I made on Sunday, I think the one takeaway from that is he had pretty much close to a solid decade. I think where he sort of, I don't think you ever beat those demons, but where he was finally put over and lived a happy, or at least a seemingly happy life at the end there, and certainly wasn't long enough, but I suppose it never really is. Go through here, and I'm going to switch to a little page where it goes through some of his pictures. You can see there a picture of him in the AWA, but he actually got to start a little before that here in Florida, out of Tampa, with Championship Wrestling from Florida, Eddie Graham's territory, and he actually, his very first feud, believe it or not, was with Dusty Rhodes.
Wow.
Yeah, this was a Dusty Rhodes that still wasn't the guy that we know. But from what I understand, and I don't know a lot about this era of Scott Hall or of Dusty, I know a little bit about Dusty. This was before he'd really gotten huge, but he was already a name, especially here in Florida. He was quickly becoming one of the hottest things in Florida. But he was training under, at this time, as he was working his way up in the business. He was teaming with Dan Spivey, which he would go on for a little while in his first run with the NWA, as he went from a few territories and jumped around. But he was training under Dusty Rhodes primarily, but also Mike Rotunda and Barry Windham. So just right off the bat, learning from Dusty, Mike Rotunda, Barry Windham. Mike Rotunda, if you don't know who that is, you might know him better as IRS, or these days as Bray Wyatt's father. But so that was quite the training start to his career. It also says up here, though I'm not sure when, that he was trained by Hiro Matsuda, another legendary and known for being a little
Wow.
tough wrestling trainer. But he started going around. Him and Dan Spivey formed a tag team called American Starship. Spivey was Starship Eagle, and Scott Hall would be known as Starship Coyote. And Right.
Thank God for gimmick changes in this one instance.
And there's a picture of them. The first picture will be the next picture that pops up. Um, but that'll be of Scott Hall and Dan Spivey as American Starship, very early in their career, right there. See Coyote and Eagle.
Wow.
But Dusty would loan him out to Mid Atlantic in the Carolinas. So that would, at this point, Jim Crockett was running Mid Atlantic, but it wasn't quite, the Jim Crockett Promotions that it became very shortly after this. And they had a run. They even had a match for the NWA National Tag Team titles against Ole and Arn Anderson.
Oh,
From there, they went to Kansas City. And Bob Geigel, I don't know if you've heard of Bob Geigel,
yeah.
legendary promoter in that area in the Central States. It was called. Dan Spivey didn't stay long. He ended up going back to Mid Atlantic. But Scott Hall had a nice little run in the Central States territory. And then that's shortly very after is when he made the jump to the AWA to Minneapolis to work for Vern Gagne. And that was where he really, really got hot. This was the AWA shortly after, just a year and a half or so after Hulk Hogan had left. Because Hulk Hogan he'd been in the Worldwide Wrestling Federation for a while, and then he made Rocky, and, Vince Sr. didn't like any of his guys to make movies and go do stuff like that. So he ended up being fired from there. And then Hulk Hogan went to the AWA, and that's when the Hulk Hogan that you know and love today really got his start. And he became huge for a little while and had this big rise and could have been a thing that saved the AWA. But as we know, as Vince Jr. liked to do, kind of came in with his pocketbook and stole him away, along with several other AWA talents. But Vern Gagne saw Scott Hall as his next Hulk Hogan. And certainly, if you look at Scott Hall, especially in that day, they were even calling him Magnum. He had a Magnum TA look. He was big,
That bushy
huge,
mustache,
the
the
big
hair,
mustache, the hair.
the chest. Yep.
Yeah. So, but what eventually happened was he got with his buddy, Kurt Hennig, who was also brought up in the AWA under the tutelage of his dad, Larry the Axe Hennig. And Scott and Kurt, the future Mr. Perfect, formed a tag team that was pretty legendary. Probably the best thing in the latter stages of the AWA was the tag team of Scott Hall and Kurt Hennig. They would win the AWA Tag Team Championships and have a pretty good run with it before losing it to, of all people, Stan Hansen and Rick Martel.
That's a team. Wow.
Right, right. It's always you go back and you through history and you look at people's careers and they go, "Oh, those two were together," and "Oh, wow, like those two had a match." I mean, like going through this, we'll get obviously to later in his career in TNA, but it's still weird to think about Scott Hall and AJ Styles having had a match.
Yeah,
You know,
and I was around watching TNA in that era, so that was you think about that. It's just all these names crossing paths. In the entertainment business, there's like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
yeah.
Almost in professional wrestling, it's like there's a 6 degrees of Scott Hall.
Oh, for sure. Well, and anyone when any wrestler that was brought up in that late territory era, and then they were all funneled into either WWF or WCW pretty much. So they've all been around each other that era of wrestler for sure. Um, he would also at this time he would jump to New Japan every once in a while for a quick tour. Um, he did have a couple of tryouts with the WWF in 1987 and then again in 1990. Nothing came of it, obviously. He also had a early run here in WCW in 1989. Now this is literally right as Ted Turner bought Crockett Promotions and started calling it the name of the show that he had on TBS, World Championship Wrestling. Um, Jim Ross is the one that brought him in '89. He was doing talent relations down there in early Turner WCW. Um, but he would pretty much just be a jobber. He wasn't on TV a lot, despite his great look. Um, he would he wouldn't stay there long, only a few months, and that's when he started doing more New Japan stuff on a more regular basis for a little bit. Um, he went to Germany for catch wrestling and had a little run there, and then Puerto Rico. Uh, Infamous promotion down there in Puerto Rico, the World Wrestling Council. Um, had a little bit of a run down there, even won their secondary title, the Caribbean Heavyweight Championship, and had a little run with that. Got to stop the yums. I'm doing that too much. But, and the this is when he would go back to WCW. And he would become the Diamond Stud under the tutelage and management of Diamond Dallas Page. And this is when he would get his first really big run. He would get pushed pretty heavily here. He started his very first match, his debut match at Super Brawl 1, May 19th, 1991, was against Tommy Wildfire Rich, a legend of the business, and squashed him. So that was a pretty good, starting moment right there for Scott Hall in WCW. And he would go on to have quite a run. He did lose to Ron Simmons at one point. Of course, this is at a time when Ron Simmons was really hot. He wasn't far off from being world champion. And he would go on from there. He was briefly considered. Oh no, he was in a stable called the Diamond Mind, and this I do remember. The Diamond Mind was a stable with Diamond Dallas Page as the manager before he was started wrestling himself, and it had Scott Hall, the Diamond Stud. It had Scotty Flamingo, and it had Vinny Vegas.
Kevin Nash.
Exactly. So I tried looking. I couldn't find a single picture of Vinny Vegas and Diamond Stud together, which is sad. I wanted to see a young version of the both of them together, but it wouldn't be too long. Apparently, the idea was flown about to put him in the Dangerous Alliance, but that got rejected, and he ended up jumping ship to the WWF in 1992. And of course, the famous story, and this is where you probably remember seeing him first. I didn't really watch until 1998, so I started watching when I was a little older. But he would, of course, become known as Razor Ramon, and the famous story that's been told a lot the last day or so of how that gimmick came about, how he had the idea and he went to Vince and pitched it, and Vince had never seen Scarface, which kind of actually made it that much better because it was his first time seeing, that character to a degree. And it was great. Let's run it with it, pal, and of course have a great run. And that, I know you want to talk about that ladder match at WrestleMania 10.
Oh, let me tell you, man, thinking back, as a child, my grandfather, he's the person who got me into professional wrestling. And he used to take me all the time to this video store we had in the town I grew up in. And, I remember the Royal Rumbles, 92, 93. Those were my favorites. But the first pay-per-view that he ever actually bought that I watched, that image right there.
There it is.
Razor Ramon versus Shawn Michaels. And that just classic Intercontinental Championship match from WrestleMania 10. One of the few reasons why I am so strongly opinionated about the Intercontinental Championship as I am. Just the storyline going into it. Everything about that match, the build-up, the story, the finish. And of course, as we just saw with the image on the other screen there, the iconic image at the end with Scott Hall in the iconic bad guy pose with both IC titles in his hand. Man, how could you just absolutely not fall in love with that guy, the character, right then and there? Heel face, granted, back then in the 90s, it was a little bit more taboo to say you pull for the heel. But
Well, yeah, but you could say that was sort of a precursor to what the NWO there became, was the sort of anti-hero. Well, and the NWO weren't anti-heroes. Stone Cold was an anti-hero,
yes,
but that sort of cool heel, you rooted against them, but you just cheered for them at the same time. You loved to see them. They were entertaining as hell. And Scott Hall was that. He was just cool. He reeked of
you,
machismo, right? So it
you
was it was a great time for him to be a wrestling fan, watching him at that point. Obviously, he would go on. He would have a great run in the WWF. Uh, and of course, the formation of the Click. We got to go through that behind the scenes a little bit. Talk about five guys who love the business, weren't afraid to ruffle feathers, and maybe had a little too much fun at times as well. But and there is a picture of the curtain call in here. What a group of guys! They changed the business. Your thoughts on the Click as a whole? Let's go there.
my thoughts on the Click as a whole is basically without the Click, there would be no DX, no NWO, no Bullet Club in New Japan. I mean, from that point, when you think about the Click and how close they were as a group, you also get into, let's say, roles reversed, and certain people went to WCW, and Hall and Nash stayed in WWE. That could have very easily been your Degeneration X. That's how like-minded everyone within that group was. That just maybe these little what ifs, these tiny instances, these little trip in the wrist could have possibly changed what we've known about professional wrestling today. And without that group, the Click, we wouldn't have things like guaranteed contracts in professional wrestling, because you got to remember back then, it was taboo to talk about what you made. Those five guys were ripping up paychecks in front of each other and being like, oh, this is what I made for this match. Well, this is bullshit. This is what we made. Let's go
Absolutely.
to Vince.
That
And
was
then,
huge. Yeah, you've heard them all tell that story, from Shawn Michaels to Scott to Kevin Nash, tell the story about how they were all, you know, looking at each other's paychecks and going, "Hey, I main evented that show. You just did a little run in. Why are you getting paid more than me? That doesn't make any sense." So and I think Kevin Nash was the one to call up Vince or Pat Patterson, one of the two, or maybe JR at the time. The timing on that's a little fuzzy. But I think it was calling up Pat. No, not Pat Patterson. JJ Dillon at the time,
that's
who was
right.
running talent relations at that time. And they called up JJ Dillon, and he's like, "What's going on here? He just did a run in. I did the whole match. He's getting paid 15. I got paid 10. What's going on there?" Like, "Oh, clerical error. Screw up." Yeah, we'll work on it. Hang up, click, Vince. They're talking to each other. you know.
This
So
isn't good.
this isn't good. So of course Vince would call up. "Oh yeah, we'll get this fixed. Don't worry about it, pal." You know. But that was probably one of the biggest things they did. And of course, it's taboo. It wasn't taboo just in the wrestling business. Any job you've ever had, certainly when I went into management at the restaurant that I worked at that made me a manager, they're like, "Don't tell any of the other managers what you make." It's illegal for you to say that to an employee, by the way.
Did not know that.
Yeah, it's illegal
Keep
for
that
them
in
to
the
tell
back
you
pocket.
that. Exactly. But that's power to them. So that way they can keep salaries as low as possible by making you embarrassed. It's become a thing. You're almost embarrassed to let people know what you make. No, tell people. Tell people what you make. That's what you should do. And that's what they did. It kind of went throughout the business, and now, and of course, shortly after that, WCW was doing the guaranteed contracts, but it was really Scott Hall coming over, and you know, at that time, Sting had the biggest guaranteed contract. I think it was somewhere around 800 grand in that range. And this is all from memory, and I could be wrong, but 800 grand a year
Yeah.
guaranteed. And it was even a phrase within the business called Sting money, right? And Scott gets the offer from WCW, and he's talking to Kevin Nash about it, who's coming up as well in his contract. And Kevin Nash looks at Scott and he's like, "How much?" And Scott Hall goes, "Bigger than Sting money." And then that's when the idea is like, "Hey, I'm just the IC champ. You're the former world champ. You come with me." Scott had a favored nations clause, which I don't know if you know what a favored nations is in a contract, but that means if anyone comes in after him, basically, very basically, if anyone comes in after him that gets paid more, you got to bump him up to match it. So bringing in Kevin to follow him was a nice shrewd little part on the part, a nice shrewd little move on the part of Scott, because it meant not only was he getting this huge contract, it was going to immediately be bumped up even more because Kevin's contract was going to have to be more as a former world champion.
Yeah.
And of course, the bungling of WCW and their contracts at that time sort of been infamous, but just yeah, the guarantee contracts, what they did there, and the move to WCW for the two of them, of course, really the catalyst for what became known as the Attitude Era. But really the whole Monday Night War era between the two companies. The third man, Hulk Hogan, NWO. And it wasn't too long after that when I started watching. Go ahead and give me your thoughts on Bash at the Beach 96 and the NWO as a whole. And then I got some stories I got to tell from there. Go ahead.
Well, Bash at Beach 96, keep in mind, I was 5 years old, right?
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
And I recently just got to tell this story to my girlfriend because we took my daughter to Hogan's Beach Shop recently. And that's a story for the end. But when the Outsiders came in, Hall and Nash, this was before internet dirt sheets and all that, where you knew what was going on at all times within the business. So you have Hall and Nash coming in, portraying their WWF characters. And, at the time, it's mind-blowing, right?
Yeah.
And you're also, for me, I'm at the age where you're impressionable with the whole take your vitamins, say your prayers. So watching the pay-per-view with my grandfather, when that turn happens, my grandfather legitimately broke our television. I remember it clear as day.
Wow.
To me, that was a moment where Superman joins the Soviets. It was like, wow, your childhood hero gone. Looking back on it now as an adult in hindsight, one of the greatest swerves in professional wrestling history. You're not expecting the third man to be Captain America,
Right.
So
right.
That whole situation going into it, and just recently, not too long ago, I watched it on Peacock. You get Lex going out early with an injury. I think it was a Lex or yeah, Lex.
It was Lex
going out with it. Yeah, Lex going out with that injury early. Just all the things leading up to it, and you still don't know who that third man is, and then they get down to one, and Hogan drops that leg. Let me tell you, man, just certain images stick out more throughout the history of professional wrestling than others. And that image of Hogan still wearing the red and yellow, thumbs out towards Hall and Nash, the formation of the New World Order. Certain things like that just can't be recreated, man.
No, 100%. Like, that is a seminal moment in wrestling.
That one right there, actually.
Yep. Probably one of the most important moments Certainly the last 25 years in all of wrestling.
Absolutely.
Shoot, it's been 26 years, so not in the last 25 years, in the last 30 years. Yeah.
Jesus. Just
Yeah, no,
dating ourselves a
20.
little bit.
Jeez, it's been 96. Wow. Yeah, 26 years. That's insane. That's been that long. But I wasn't watching at this point. There was a game, and I'm going to bring it up here, see if I can find it. And I touched on this briefly, called, and I know you know what it is. And it came out in 97. And I was in elementary school. I was in 5th grade in 97. And there we go. And oh jeez, come on. Either way, you get the game.
NWO Revenge.
Yep. WCW, no, World Tour. WCW
World Tour, that's
World
right.
Tour. And it was the first.
It
was Revenge was the sequel, and this is the first. It was actually a Japanese wrestling game before that, and they retooled it into this for an American release with the WCW license. But I was not a wrestling fan at all. I was that stupid kid that, anytime I saw, in elementary school, like in 1st grade or whatever, and they came in with a Hulk Hogan WWF, lunchbox, I would, wrestling's fake, right? Because that was what my mom told me. I was like, oh, wrestling's fake. You don't want to watch that. And so I just sort of would roll my eyes at it because that's what my mom kind of did. But then I had this friend, my best friend in 5th grade, David Reed. He got me into two huge loves. One, 1997 was also the release of the special editions of Star Wars. And he took me to see Empire Strikes Back with him that year in a theater. And I'd never seen Star Wars before. So that was a mind-blowing experience that changed my life. And then he also had this video game on the Nintendo 64 at his house. And he always wanted to play it with me. And I'm like, oh, wrestling's stupid. I don't want to play this game. But I'd play it. And, of course, going through, and you got to pick a character, right? And, of course, the first thing I noticed was Hogan in the game didn't look how I knew him to look. He wasn't in the red and the yellow, and he was black and white and Hollywood Hulk Hogan. What is this? And so that just kind of piqued my interest. But I figured it would be, even as a kid, I was like, oh, I don't want to be what everyone's going to pick Hulk Hogan, so I'll try to be somebody else. And I picked someone else in that NWO stable in the game. Of course, I had no idea who anyone is, so I picked Eric Bischoff to play as. So, him and his friends, they're all picking Sting and the Giant and Lex Luger. And I'm in there as Eric Bischoff because I thought, well, he's got like the jacket on and he's got the hair even in the little, N64 game. I'm like, oh, he looks kind of cool. I'll pick him. I mean, just assuming he was a wrestler too. But I had no interest in watching it. There was one night I stayed at his house with a few other of his friends, and they were all watching Nitro. I'm like, I'm just going to go to sleep early. I don't care to watch this. And they were all interested in, and I kind of vaguely remember them talking about Hulk Hogan or Hollywood Hogan versus the Giant that night. It was on a Nitro, but I'm like, I got no interest in this. But I was sitting at home one night in my bed, very late, 97, December 97 probably, and in fact it had to be, I'm pretty sure, the first memory I have really of watching. Well, I won't say it. I know the first time I saw it was there late 97, flipping through the channels, and I didn't even know there were two different companies, right? But TNT was lower in the dial than USA was. So I happened to come across, just going up through the channels, came across TNT first, and then there's Nitro on a Monday night. And who's the person I see on screen but Eric Bischoff? So I'm like, oh, that's that guy from the video game I always picked. No wonder they all laughed at me. But that hooked me, and I watched it for a second, and then I continued on, and then a couple of weeks later, I watched more of it. The first really moment, like story, I kind of remember was, and I know this was a thing that happened right after Starrcade '97 or Starrcade '96. No, it had to be because see, now my timeline's all screwy with me. You know, it had to be. I think I'm a year late. I got into it in '97. Oh, because the special editions of Star Wars. I remember seeing, because after Starrcade '96 with Hogan and Piper chokes out Hollywood Hogan, right? Puts him to sleep. And then on the Nitro after, they're showing the footage of that, and then all of a sudden, just before Hogan loses the match, the tape goes all wonky and it cuts back to live because the NW went in a truck and stole the tape. So no one will ever see Piper lose or Piper beat Hogan again, right? And they can just come out and say it didn't happen. I went out there and I kicked Piper's ass, right? And they could get their heat back, and it was brilliant. I definitively remember seeing that as a kid, but the timeline isn't right because I know it wasn't until late '97 when I really started watching. So, but yeah, it was the NWO. It'll make the long story longer. It was the NWO that really got me going into pro wrestling, and because I knew who Hogan was, but at this point he's a bad guy. Everyone's booing him instead of cheering for him. So let me be the bad guy, and I'll cheer for the NWO that everyone's booing for. And the guy I gravitated to the most in that group was Scott Hall, without a doubt. He was cool, and he was so much fun to watch. And of course, at the time I started watching, you had the Wolfpack too, which you're wearing their shirt. And I'd go to school, and I was the only NWO Hollywood black and white fan, but all the other kids were Wolfpack fans and whatever. And I even bet $1 over the '98 Spring Stampede War Games, because it was WCW versus the NWO versus the Wolfpack, right? And that NWO would win. I don't remember who won that match, but and in my family, my mom never got into it, but I got my brother into it a bit, and I got my dad into it a little bit because you're watching it on the one TV really at home, and so I ended up being the NWO guy. My brother was a Sting guy, and of course Sting joined the Wolfpack, so he was the Wolfpack guy. So I had an NWO shirt. He had a shirt like you're wearing, and my dad loved Goldberg, so he had a Goldberg shirt. So we had WCW, Wolfpack, and NWO Black and White, all being represented in my family, which was one of my favorite memories. That NWO shirt, the reason I'm not wearing it right now is because it got kind of, a couple of years later, I wore the thing out so much that one day I just recorded myself doing a Hulk Hogan tear of it just for fun. But I think I did the same thing to my brother's Wolfpack shirt, and never told him that. But after my dad died, I did see his Goldberg shirt, and I meant to grab it. I don't ever know what happened to it, but yeah, that NWO means the world to me. And Scott Hall was the guy. I loved watching him. Anytime he came out with the toothpick, throwing that in the face, that to me, between that and Hollywood Hogan coming out, I still get chills to Voodoo Child. But yeah. And of course, he would go on to have his issues, would come to the forefront a little bit in WCW. Some of it got used in WCW, which would have been when I was watching '98 when they did, he's an alcoholic kind of angle, and he was stumbling out. Which some of it made for good TV, some of it didn't. I saw a fun match just the other day on YouTube of it was a 6-man tag. It was the Wolfpack, Sting and no Conan and Lex Luger, and the NWO, Scott Norton, uh, somebody else, I forget who, Scott Norton, maybe the Giant, and no, it was Stevie Ray. Scott Norton, Stevie Ray, and Scott Hall. But Scott Hall, he had a drink in his hand and he was all drunk, right?
The
And then,
wobble, yeah.
yeah, and then the Wolfpack came out, uh, Lex Luger and Conan, but they looked. Lex Luger is looking upset, like where's he? And next thing you know, the match starts, and Kevin Nash is supposed to be the third guy, and he's not there. And all of a sudden, it cuts to the back, and wearing an old outsider shirt is Kevin Nash, and he's got a drink in his hand, and he's all drunk, and he stumbles his way out to the ring, and they're looking at him like Scott Norton and Stevie Ray are looking at Scott Hall like, what the hell? And eventually they both end up in the match together. They both still got their drinks in the ring, and they're laughing at each other, and they give each other a hug, and they cheers, right? And then Scott Hall kind of turns around and takes a sip, looking back at Scott Norton and Stevie Ray, and then you just see Kevin Nash with his cup just go, you know, like he's like Kevin Nash just goes, and suddenly goes serious, and it's obviously he was faking the entire time, and just destroys Scott Hall. It was beautiful, and the Wolfpack won in short order after that. It was a fun little match that I probably would have seen live, but I had no memory of.
Yeah.
But that was my peak time in wrestling. And of course, Scott Hall, shortly after that, they would be brought back after the WCW sale to the WWF. They would be brought in a short time later in 2001 at the No Way Out pay-per-view that year, and be the poison injected into the World Wrestling Federation by Vince McMahon.
I thought that was 2002 because 2001.
Yeah, it was 02. Yeah, you're right.
Because I just for whatever reason I vividly remember the 9/11 SmackDown because they were the first event that ran after 9/11.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Scott Hall's run here would be brief this time around. Again, for, the plane ride from hell is an infamous story that we don't need to get into. There's an excellent Dark Side of the Ring show. You can watch. I did an episode on that. But that would lead to him getting fired from the company. But this short little run did produce some good things, even though the NWO angle wasn't done the best. And by the time this is Hogan's return to the WWF, and he's in there as Hollywood Hogan, which is fantastic to see. But the WWF fans wanted to cheer Hogan. Yeah. And so, of course, it wasn't too long. You get to WrestleMania 18, and they're just going nuts for him. So that the NWO angle kind of fell flat in the WWF. But it did have a great match. Scott Hall's last WrestleMania match, I believe, was that year, WrestleMania 18, if I'm not mistaken, against Steve Austin. So he's in there with, one of the best ever to do it, and a buddy of his, for his last WrestleMania match. And Steve Austin's second to last WrestleMania match. So after that, he'd go to TNA, which we talked about, and I know nothing about his run in TNA. So why don't you go and tell me a little bit about his TNA run?
So his TNA run, extremely brief.
Yeah.
Extremely brief. Unfortunately, there wasn't a whole lot of memorable moments about it. That was a point in time in Scott's life where things were getting a little out of control with just demons. But yeah, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot to talk about. He had one match with AJ Styles. Unfortunately, AJ Styles could carry a rusty tune in a bucket, but just not a whole lot of memory with this,
But that certainly wasn't, it certainly wasn't peak Scott Hall. But weren't they trying to do something along the lines of, obviously they couldn't call it the NWO. I don't know, didn't they call it the Pack or something along that? Or
God, I I think because if I'm not
Because
wrong,
it was
Sean Walt,
Nash Hall and Waltman, right? I mean,
yeah, Waltman was involved. Yeah, it was the Pack, but they spelled it PAC, just like X Pac.
well, right. Well, in
Uh,
The Wolfpack in WCW didn't have a K either. It was spelled without the
yeah,
K. So, but yeah, I didn't never watch TNA, so I didn't catch any of that.
it
That was at a time when I had stopped watching. So,
it was a very brief thing that I actually didn't know about until probably like 3 years ago, because I thought Nash's first time in the company was when he came in with the whole main event mafia thing years later. However, I do vaguely remember Scott Hall at that time, and that was, like we said, dark time, Scott. It is what it is, but
well, yeah,
fortunately, from
and
there,
we don't need to get into it, but he did get over those issues. Thankfully, we all know that thanks to his friend DDP and Jake Roberts. But yeah, so that would be kind of the end. He would do independence from there on occasion. Some of those demons would show up a little too publicly at times, but he got cleaned up with DDP, and then would be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, which is obviously the clip of his "Go Home" line at the end of his speech has been, I don't want to say overused because it's a fantastic line the last couple of days, but it's certainly something everyone knows and remembers. Uh, Perhaps more than his "Hey Yo" in the surveys. They remember that last line in his Hall of Fame speech, and of course, well deserved induction there. And he would get inducted once again, though before that, he would make an appearance at a WrestleMania and have a little run in with the was it WrestleMania 32 with Sting versus
Sting
Triple
versus
H,
Triple H. Yep.
which and that match gets maligned. I think it's a fantastic match, the match itself, regardless of the finish. That match gets maligned because of why would Triple H go over Sting? Sting should have went over. People will talk about it that way, based on the story they were telling. I understand why Triple H went over. Whether or not the match should have been that story is something different, but they were basically making the match a parable of WCW versus WWF. So, here's Sting and Triple H, these two titans, and they're going at it. And Sting's got the upper hand. Now the other guy's got the upper hand. And now, here comes one's friends, D-Generation X, from that era. And, nope. Now here comes the NWO. Even though in kayfabe land, it made 0 sense for the NWO to come to Sting's rescue, of all people.
Yeah.
It was just like, holy crap, we're getting D-Generation X versus the NWO right here. And, obviously Hogan couldn't do a whole lot of bumping. Scott Hall didn't, he was, he wasn't too far off from walking with it, from using a cane. So he threw a couple of punches. It was, Nash had the size, but it was X-Pac and Billy Gunn, and to a lesser degree, Road Dogg bumping for the NWO, which was just fantastic. Sean Waltman running all over the place, taking bumps on the side, outside of the ring. And of course, that moves on, and then you go into the finish of the match with the sledgehammer and all of that, and then the Triple H just barely goes over on Sting, the WWF just barely coming out on top in the war against WCW. So that was kind of the story to me that they were telling, and why it made sense for Triple H to win in that context. That's a debate we can have for another time if you care to have it, but that was a fantastic moment to see Scott out there doing that. And then, of course, his last appearance was also a WrestleMania just last year after getting inducted for the NWO as a whole. His two-time Hall of Famer. They call it in the WWE. But man, what a career! What a legend! And we're running a little long. We're at half the length of a full show right now, but that's on me. I'm running on a little bit, but just
You know,
go ahead.
with somebody like Scott Hall, we say that there are only so many iconic images in wrestling, and especially within the last 30 years, the night that the NWO was formed is one of them. But as I'm sitting here and I'm looking through these pictures, there's so many moments that are iconic that Scott Hall was in. More
Yeah,
recently, I believe it was Raw 25. You had
yeah.
members of NWO, D-Generation X, and Bullet Club all in one ring, throwing up the two sweet. I mean, somebody who marks out for independent wrestling like I do, and wrestling other than just what's mainstream in the country, that moment, another beautiful moment. I mean, then you think as far as to Scott Hall's connection with Bullet Club himself. Cody Hall's son, brief member for a little bit. You know, there's just all these little intricate things that just make Scott Hall the pivotal key in what professional wrestling is today.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's very weird to for me, it's kind of like really setting in right now, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, man, it's just,
I just
wow.
a memory kind of just clicked for me looking at the slide of pictures I got going over there, and I said earlier my dad was a Goldberg guy, right? And he had the Goldberg shirt, but before that, when we really started watching, and I was into the NWO and all that, my dad, the one he gravitated to was Scott Hall, and that's probably why I did too. Um, he loved watching him, and my dad died in 2004, and I think to a certain degree, I'm just kind of realizing this in my head that I sort of connect my dad Scott Hall because especially the pictures of him younger, like in the AWA with the mustache, like that looks like
Yeah.
my dad. I mean, my dad was never built like that by any stretch, but there's a connection there in my head. Maybe that's why it hit me harder than uh, or hit me so hard the other day or yesterday when it happened. But
And this is a full circle within all that. If you remember seeing pictures back in January, I was just talking about this earlier, taking my kid down to Hogan's Beat Shop.
yeah, yeah, I remember seeing those
She
pictures.
saw the stuffy of Hulk Hogan. She calls Hulk Hogan Hoagie. We all got the NWO shirts. Me, my daughter, my little brother on Clearwater Beach taking the NWO pictures. I guess technically my daughter was our third man. Um, that led to a very interesting rabbit hole over the last 2 months where my daughter's now getting into professional wrestling. And as you watch Hulk Hogan clips, you stumble across NWO picks or NWO matches.
Yeah,
And, I had the pleasure of explaining to her all these people are Scott Hall, Kevin Nash. Why is this guy coming down from the Raptors with a baseball bat hurting Hoagie? But like the real joy of it was just like you were saying, there's that connection there because my grandfather passed away and I believe it was 2006. My grandfather was the guy who raised me, and wrestling was what we always bonded over.
yeah,
And now I'm instilling that in my daughter. And it's just, you know, like you're saying, man, so many of those moments are involved with Scott Hall. Man,
yeah. It didn't really click for me until a few moments ago. But yeah, it that yeah, looking at that picture there, even my dad loved that guy, and I think because of that, I ended up loving that guy too. And that just means everything to me, that we had that connection, and that I can now think about it and remember it so fondly. But yeah, that's it for tonight. We ran longer than we wanted to. I rambled on a bit. I'll get better at this. Tony will get better at this. He's already better than me at this, but
Oh, shucks.
but that'll be it for now. Or in this little special Buckle Bomb Show presentation, remembering Scott Hall. We'll see you guys next time. On Sunday, we'll be recording a full episode just like normal with all the news and wrestling. We watched Raw this week. First time I'd watched Raw in years. Man.
First time I've watched Raw all the way through in years.
So, yeah, we'll be talking about our thoughts on that along with several other topics. Tony, I'll see you later.
Bye, brother.